But reckoning time, whose millioned accidents creep in twixt vows and change decrees of kings, tan sacred beauty, blunt the sharpest intents, divert strong minds to the cause of altering things. In the course of the 16th century, England stumbles along from crisis to crisis. The reigning Tudor monarchs are strongly inclined to decapitate their next of kin. The state religion changes 4 times in 25 years. Several uprisings shake the country. The threat of war looms on the horizon. And finally, the plague. Yet, interestingly enough, each crisis leaves England a little bit stronger, and all that turmoil influences William Shakespeare. It's only 5 years back from our starting point, 1593. 5 years. The year 1588. The attack of the invincible Spanish Armada. Imagine the feeling of dread creeping in, pervading everyday life, and then the Armada's miserable defeat. England sold it as a glorious victory. It's a fact, though, that the admirals Lord Howard and Sir Francis Drake were gloriously lucky as well, but victory it was, and a boost to confidence. With the defeat of the Armada, England starts to get shipshape. In the course of time, she will become the world's leading sea power. Those lines that I before have writ do lie, even those that said, I could not love you dearer. Yet, then my judgment knew no reason why my most full flame should afterwards burn clearer. The Queen is Protestant. Under her rule, it is better to be Protestant as well. Not all her subjects agree, though.
Already the next big crisis is in sight. In 1599, it will erupt into a bloody and humiliating uprising against the English from their nearest neighbours. Ireland, nominally a subject country to the English crown, is fiercely Catholic and forever rebellious. The Irish rebels are supported by other European powers. The go-betweens are the Jesuits. They are accused of practicing equivocation, telling only part of the truth or talking ambiguously in order to confuse or goad others to act against their own interest. Equivocation is particularly dangerous in a time where only some people could read or write, and you have to rely on word of mouth. Shakespeare will work the phenomenon of equivocation into his darkest play, Macbeth.
But how can you not equivocate? How can you speak plainly when there is a conflict of interest deep down inside you? Some scholars believe that Will Shakespeare was a secret Catholic, albeit not a practicing one. His father in Stratford, John Shakespeare, on the other hand, seemed to have clung to the old faith. Papers to that effect had been found after the old man's decease. Bit of a problem for the son in London, who had to operate in a very Protestant capital. So even when writing about private matters like love, he was constantly watching his back. Alas, why, fearing of time's tyranny, could I not then say, now I love you best, when I was certain or in certainty, crowning the present, doubting of the rest?
The Queen is pragmatic on the subject of religion. I have no desire to make windows into men's souls, she once said. To put it plainly, her subjects' private beliefs do not interest her. But her tolerance extends only as far as her subjects are behaving as good Englishmen. Protestants are better Englishmen. They have only one mistress and do not hearken to a meddling pope. Several conspiracies are plotted against Elizabeth, including one assassination attempt actually carried out by an English Jesuit. She survives them all. But Catholics remain suspect. The officials rightly assume that some Catholics, supported by Spanish money, are trying to fuel rebellion against the Queen. How does all that affect everyday life, I wonder?
Those lines that I before have writ do lie. even those that said, I could not love you dearer. Yet, then my judgment knew no reason why my most full flame should afterwards burn clearer. But, reckoning time, whose millioned accidents creep in twixt vows and change decrees of kings, tan sacred beauty, blunt the sharpest intents, divert strong minds to the cause of altering things. Alas, why? Fearing of time's tyranny, could I not then say, now I love you best, when I was certain or in certainty, crowning the present, doubting of the rest. Love is a babe. Then might I not say so, to give full growth to that which still doth grow? Well is ingenious in juggling with the meaning of words, keeping them balanced in mid-air, as it were. It's a life-saving faculty when political incorrectness could get you banged up in jail, or worse. Therefore, a network of powerful protective friends is vital, which brings us back to the Earl of Southampton. There's a good chance that Will addressed at least part of his sonnets to him, but there are other candidates as well.
From 1590 on, the sonnet form gains huge popularity in England. Around that time, Shakespeare must have started to write his sonnets. Will develops his own form, the English or Shakespearean sonnet, which you already know from the textual analysis. The sonnet is a poetic form imported from Renaissance Italy, just like today's entertainment industry imports and modifies all kinds of musical styles. Every age has its fashionable trends. In the England of the 1590s, sonnets are in high fashion, comparable to today's musical currents like, let's say, hip-hop. I'm not going to tell you about hip-hop. Most of you know more about it than I do, but I like it, and I'm not the only one to see parallels. Take the rhythm, for example. Shakespeare's favoured iambic pentameter is used in many hip-hop songs. If you're interested, Google these gentlemen on YouTube. They are great fun to listen to.
William Shakespeare writes 154 sonnets between 1590 and 1600. At first sight, they seem to be about love, all shades of love, adoration, desire, sex, passion. He also writes about the downside of human emotions: dejection, grief, loneliness, self-doubt, anger, even revulsion. And then, in 1609, Thomas Thorpe publishes them without the author's consent. There is a good chance that Will Shakespeare resented this bootleg publication, but he can do nothing about it. There were no copyright laws then. Besides, he knows everything about bootlegging himself with his habit of rifling through others' works. In 1609, William Shakespeare is famous, and Thorpe hopes to make money out of it.
Thorpe dedicates the collection to a Mr. W.H. His dedication, not Shakespeare's, goes like this. To the only begetter of these ensuing sonnets, Mr. W.H., all happiness and that eternity promised by our ever-living poet, wisheth the well-wishing adventurer in setting forth, etc., etc.
Who is this mysterious Mr. W.H.? And why does it seem so important to discover his true identity? Well, if you look at the dedication, Mr. W.H. is the begetter of these ensuing sonnets. Does that imply that he inspired Will Shakespeare to write these sonnets? From Sonnet 18 on, the tone is very personal, sometimes reminiscent of pillow talk. Of course, people get curious. Who is the object of Will's passion? With whom did he share his bed?
He mentions several people in his sonnets, which adds to the confusion. Experts have identified the fair youth, the rival poet, the dark lady, and the evasive eye, of course. Let us first stick to the question as to who might hide behind Mr. W.H. There are three prominent candidates. Candidate number 1 is Risley, note the silent W, Henry, 3rd Earl of Southampton. Candidate number 2 is William Herbert, 3rd Earl of Pembroke. Why? Oh, in the early 1590s, Will Shakespeare had already shown great promise as a writer, and he had connections to Pembroke as well. Candidate number 3 is William Hatcliffe, reading law like Southampton and enfant terrible of Gray's Inn. Shakespeare has also business there. Gray's Inn? Next basic info. Gray's Inn is one of 4 royal judicial bodies, the Inns of Court. The building of Gray's Inn is situated in the borough of Holborn, where Southampton also has an estate. Every British lawyer has to be a member of one of the Inns of Court. Many high-born sons study law, and Will Shakespeare is a familiar guest at Gray's Inn. Plays are frequently staged there. A considerable number of law students develop a taste for theatre, and some are eager to participate in productions staged for the annual Christmas revels. Will's Comedy of Errors receives its first mention there in 1594. William Hatcliffe is a commoner, but wealthy, young, good-looking, and given to partying. All these young, aspiring law students are birds of a feather with a talent for celebrating. Stage professionals willing to give a hand with revelling are welcome.
Networking has always been part of the theatre business, and we can safely assume that Will Shakespeare is no exception. At the same time, he must have realized that he can never be on a par with these rich, well-connected guys. They're a step above his class. Sonnet 23 can be interpreted as a love poem, but also as an appeal to be generously tolerant in terms of friendship, to see gentleness and good intentions behind the speaker's clumsiness, his lack of education. In order to illustrate his point, he uses a familiar image, that of an inexperienced actor who garbles his role because his stage fright gets the better of him. Every actor knows these terrifying, utterly humiliating situations where there is so much inward pressure that you start bellowing your lines instead of saying them, or the mind goes blank and you dry up in front of an audience which in your scared imagination transforms into a 1,000-eyed malign monster about to gobble you up, hair, boots and all.
Wie ein ungeübter Spieler auf der Bühne, wenn ihn die Furcht in seiner Rolle hindert, oder ein Wesen wild vor Wut und Tün, das eigen Herz die große Stärke mindert. Vergesst die Worte, ich die richtigen der Liebe zu platzieren. In meiner eigenen Liebe Wirbel droh ich zu verlieren mich.
As an unperfect actor on the stage, who with his fear is put beside his part, or some fierce thing replete with too much rage, whose strength's abundance weakens his own heart. So I for fear of trust forget to say the perfect ceremony of love's rite, and in my own love strength seem to decay, overcharged with burden of mine own love's might.
Und dass die Zeilen, die ich schreib, erklärten, was in meinem Herzen, erklärten, was in meinem Leib. Die Zunge liebesstarr nicht zu bewegen, weiß, was Liebe schweigend schrieb. Oh, lern es lesen, lern lesen. Mit Augen hören ziemt der Liebe feinen Wesen.
Or let my looks be then the eloquence and dumb presagers of my speaking breast, who plead for love and look for recompense, more than that tongue that more hath more expressed. Or learn to read what silent love hath writ. To hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit. Or learn to read what silent love hath writ. To hear with eyes belongs to love's fine wit.
Was Liebe schweigend schrieb, oh lern es lesen, lern lesen. Mit Augen hören ziemt der Liebe feinen Wesen.
Back to our mysterious Mr. W.H. He is believed to be one with the so-called fair youth of the sonnets and has inspired many a great artist. Oscar Wilde, for example, constructs a charming narrative of friendship and deceit in his short story, The Portrait of Mr. W.H.
It is the tale of a young man so obsessed with discovering the true identity of Mr. W.H. that he doesn't even stop at forgery. He is convinced that Shakespeare had hidden all the clues as to the fair youth's real name in plain sight within the sonnets. Mr. W.H. was one William Hughes, a young actor specialised in playing the female leads with the Lord Chamberlain's men. There is some truth in it. In the 16th and early 17th century, there were no professional actresses. Women were not allowed on stage, although aristocratic women took part in court masques. That is why female roles were played by young men. Both sexes were very conscious of their appearances. Especially noblemen wore their hair long. They were elaborately dressed and used perfume. According to Wilde's tale, Will had been so smitten with a young man's acting capabilities that he set out to write all his great female roles explicitly for Willie Hughes. His professional admiration turned to infatuation as Willie Hughes united the charms of both sexes. Nice.
A woman's face, with nature's own hand painted, hast thou, the master mistress of my passion. A woman's gentle heart, but not acquainted with shifting change, as is false women's fashion. An eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth. A man in hue, all hues in his controlling, which steals men's eyes and women's souls amazeth. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature, as she wrote thee, fell a-doting, and by addition me of thee defeated, by adding one thing to my purpose nothing. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. Some people criticize this sonnet as misogynistic. Well, so be it. Perhaps Will writes it after some bad experiences with the opposite sex. But Will Shakespeare is not misogynistic in general. On the contrary, he writes amazingly positive and strong female characters like Rosalind and Beatrice and Juliet and witty Mistress Quickly.
In Sonnet 20, I don't think he refers to all women. He shines a light on some women who delight in manipulating others for their own advantage. His friend, on the other hand, has a woman's gentle heart without being manipulative. That is to say, he is emphatic, soft, and sensuous. And now comes a particular piece of praise. Whatever object he deigns to consider is gilded, made golden, heightened in value by his attention. This is really special. Some kind of radiating spirituality that positively influences everything around. This is inspiration. an eye more bright than theirs, less false in rolling, gilding the object whereupon it gazeth, a man in hue, all hues in his controlling. There it is, a man in hue, that is to say, the colour, the appearance of a man. In the original publication, hue was printed with a capital H. All hues in his controlling, that is to say, all colours or all appearances or roles. That is the hint at the profession of actor. At the same time, it is pronounced just like the name Hughes, or, if you want to write it differently, Hughes. And, with just a tiny shift in stress, all hues in his controlling, he is Hughes all over. And for a woman wert thou first created, till nature, as she wrote thee, fell a-doting. Nature is personified as female creator. She gives life. Consider this. Will reverses the well-known creation myth of Eve being fashioned out of Adam's rib. Here, Mother Nature sets to create woman first, but she does such a good job that she falls a-doting, that is to say, falls in love with her own creation. Her heteroerotic appetite aroused, she thinks again and recreates this nameless wonder as a man. And by addition, me of thee defeated. Nature adds some special thing that has the effect of defeating Will's desire, I am tempted to say. Will cannot have his will, his way, with him, which is indicated by one thing to my purpose nothing. The next lines tell us more about it. But since she pricked thee out for women's pleasure, mine be thy love, and thy love's use their treasure. Pricked thee out, of course, is an enjoyably frivolous pun. He compounds picked thee out with prick. So the person in question is undoubtedly male, and, moreover, he's the pick of the bunch. Whether this implies that his beauty is outstanding or that he is well endowed, or possibly both, I will leave to your imagination. Will is a master at creating multi-layered puns. As said before, a master equivocator. Even in the last line, he plays with the meanings of the word love. Love in the sense of intense friendship, mine be thy love, and love in the sense of making love, thy love's use their treasure. Note how the inversion, mine be thy love, instead of thy love is mine, sounds more like an imperative or a powerful wish, and less like a statement. This particular sonnet is central to Wilde's colourful hypothesis that Willie Hughes is the object of Shakespeare's passionate poems.
Wilde's story is fiction, of course, but like every good fiction, it's quite plausible, and there is some truth in it. With the Lord Chamberlain's men, there were at least 2 young actor colleagues specializing in female roles for whom Will Shakespeare wrote his Rosalind and Celia and Beatrice and Hero. Perhaps they inspired him in more ways than one. Unfortunately, their names are lost to posterity. But there's one William Hughes he could have been familiar with. That particular William Hughes was a musician, employed by the old Earl of Essex, but he was far too old to be the fair youth of Will's sonnets. What connects both artists is their love of music. Will Shakespeare uses the love poem form to expand on many aspects of human relationships, and one cannot help feeling that there is more than one he's talking of. It's as if we see their shadows flitting between the lines. Who are they, you may ask? Good question.